Today we're going to talk about what might just be the single most important invention in all of human history. And get this, it didn't start with some flash of genius or a grand epic poem. Nope, it all started with a really simple, almost boring problem that once solved would completely change the world. Okay, I want you to imagine something. You're living thousands and thousands of years ago. Your tiny village is suddenly booming. It's turning into one of the first real cities on Earth. All of a sudden, you're surrounded by thousands of people. So how do you organize all that? How do you make sure everyone gets fed? How do you manage anything when you can't write a single word down?
The answer, believe it or not, is that simple. You just count stuff. That's it. That's the seed of civilization as we know it. Just figuring out a reliable way to keep a tally. I know it sounds super basic, but this one little idea would end up changing not just society, but the actual wiring of the human brain. So let's set the scene here. We're in ancient Mesopotamia, what we now call Iraq, about 11,000 years ago. For the very first time in history, humans are living together in these huge settled communities. And this creates a whole new set of problems that literally nobody had ever had to deal with before.
I mean, just think about the logistics of it. You've got these massive shared storehouses of grain. You've got herds of sheep and cattle. You've got people trading goods back and forth. Without some kind of system, it's just pure chaos. People forget, arguments break out, things get stolen. I mean, these were huge, high-stakes problems. The very survival of your new city depended on getting this right.
So, what did they do? Well, they came up with this absolutely brilliant low-tech solution. They didn't need any fancy machines or electronics. All they needed was the one thing they had tons of, just lying around everywhere: clay. They started making these little shaped pieces of clay. And the beauty of the system was its simplicity. A little cone might stand for one measure of grain. A sphere could be a bigger measure. And a flat disc, that's one sheep. And just like that, abstract goods became real, physical things that you could hold in your hand and count. These little clay tokens were, literally, the world's very first data points. And the system got incredibly sophisticated. So let's say you're sending a shipment of 10 units of grain. You'd take 10 of your little grain tokens, put them inside a hollow clay ball, kind of like an envelope, and then you'd seal it shut. But here's the genius part. For extra security, before you sealed it, you'd press the tokens into the wet clay on the outside, leaving an impression. It's a tamper-proof receipt. The only way to argue about what was inside was to break the seal and check. It's brilliant. Now, for thousands of years, this system worked perfectly. But then some clever administrator, probably trying to save a little time, had an idea that changed everything. It was a simple thought. An efficiency hack, really, that accidentally kicked off one of the biggest revolutions in human history. And this is where the big leap happens. Somebody, somewhere, started thinking, wait a minute, why do we even need the tokens inside the envelope if we're already pressing their shapes on the outside? They realized they could just ditch the tokens altogether, grab a flat piece of clay, a tablet, and just press the shapes onto it. The 3D token became a 2D symbol, and over time, those simple impressions evolved into the abstract, wedge-shaped marks we now know as cuneiform. And just like that, writing was born. So who was the very first person in all of recorded history whose name we can actually read? Was it some mighty king, a great warrior, a famous poet? Nope. It was a guy named Kushum. And we only know his name because it's on a 5,000-year-old tablet that's basically a receipt for a barley transaction. The first famous person in history was an accountant. And that's really the incredible origin story here. We didn't invent writing to tell amazing stories or to write love poems. We invented it to keep track of beer and grain shipments. It was a tool for bureaucracy first, and art came way, way later. The most transformative technology our species has ever created was born from the mundane need to do paperwork. But here's the thing. The invention of writing and numbers, it wasn't just about keeping better records. It actually fundamentally altered the way that human beings think. It kicked off a complete rewiring of our brains. You see, this shift from physical tokens to abstract symbols on a clay tablet was so much more than just a new way to communicate. It was a massive cognitive leap. It was the first time that humans could really separate the idea of a number from the thing it was counting. Think about it like this. Before this, you could totally understand having one sheep and another sheep. But the concept of the number 2, all by itself, as an abstract idea that exists separate from the sheep, that was totally revolutionary. This system allowed the human brain to grasp abstract numbers. It was, in a very real sense, the birth of mathematics. And once you have abstract numbers, oh man, everything changes. Now you can plan for the future, you can calculate crop yields, you can manage resources for a city of thousands, you can create permanent, official records of who owns what, which gives rise to the whole concept of private property. This one cognitive jump is the foundation for almost every complex system we rely on today. So how did this whole system of accounting actually shape the societies that used it? Well, the archaeological evidence gives us this amazing, crystal-clear picture of the world that these little clay tokens actually built. There's this site in Iraq called Tepe Gawra, where archaeologists have dug through layer after layer of ancient towns. And in the tombs of the most important elite people, they found something fascinating. Alongside the usual luxury goods, they found clay tokens and personal seals, the tools of an administrator. It turns out the first ruling classes weren't necessarily the strongest warriors. They were the people who controlled the information. The very first elites were knowledge workers. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's cool, but it's all ancient history. But the thing is, this super simple idea, using a physical object to represent some kind of value, it never really went away. It's still with us, everywhere, in forms you probably don't even think about.
I mean, what is an abacus? It's just a more organized system of counting tokens on rods. What are the pieces you move around in a board game? They're tokens that represent you. And the entire system of modern accounting? It's the exact same idea, abstract symbols in a ledger that represent real-world value. It all traces right back to those little pieces of clay.
And here's my favorite little piece of evidence, hiding in plain sight in our own language. The Latin word for a pebble is calculus, because the Romans used pebbles for counting on their abacuses. So the name for one of the most advanced forms of mathematics is a direct echo of our earliest, simplest counting tool. How cool is that?
So when you really put it all together, it's not an exaggeration to say that this simple accounting system is what made the modern world possible. It created the trust, the ability to plan, and the complexity that you need to build cities, to support huge economies, and to organize entire civilizations.
And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. We love to imagine progress as this series of dramatic eureka moments, but the real story of writing shows us that sometimes the most world-changing ideas don't come from trying to be revolutionary. They come from just trying to solve a practical, maybe even boring problem. Which leads me to a final question I want to leave you with. Those Mesopotamians weren't trying to invent literature. They were just trying to get their grain inventory right. So what seemingly mundane, boring problem that's being solved today, maybe in logistics or data management or some other unglamorous field, is quietly laying the foundation for the next great cognitive revolution? What's the modern equivalent of a clay token?
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are stripping away the modern world, the smartphones, the cloud servers, the stock markets, to look at the literal bedrock of civilization. We're examining the origins of written communication, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. We aren't talking about poetry or religious texts. We're talking about the clay roots of society, specifically focusing on archaeological findings from ancient Mesopotamia, that's modern-day Iraq, dating back between, 5 and 11,000 years.
It's a heavy topic for sure, but a necessary one. We're essentially looking at the transition from prehistory to history. But yeah, we aren't discussing kings or wars or great monuments today. We're discussing the administrative backbone of the ancient world. Small clay tokens, spheres, cones, and eventually the very first tablets found at sites like Tepe Gawra.
And these humble artifacts, mostly, accounting tools, they raise a massive, and I would say a defining question for the human species. Did the invention of these specific tools serve primarily as a cognitive revolution, a magnificent leap in human capability that allowed humanity to thrive through fair and efficient resource management?
Or were they, from their very inception, tools of exclusion designed to cement social hierarchy? And that's really the core tension. You look at a clay sphere and you see the invention of the human intellect, the ability to organize the chaos of the natural world. I look at the evidence from the excavation layers at Tepe Gawra and I see the invention of the have-nots. I'd argue that while technologically impressive, the evidence suggests these tools were mechanisms for establishing inherited status, protecting private property, and empowering a bureaucratic elite, really at the expense of the general population.
And I'll take the functionalist perspective, which I think is the only way to read the survival of the species. I argue that the transition from simple tokens to complex writing was a necessary, pragmatic solution to the challenge of survival. These clay objects represent the moment humanity decided to plan, to store, and to ensure that growing populations could actually eat. It wasn't about power, it was about not starving.
Well then, let's dig into the evidence, because I think the survival narrative often conveniently overlooks who exactly survived the best.
Okay? Let's start with the problem these people faced, because context is everything. We're looking at a time when populations were exploding. You have these early urban centers forming. You simply cannot rely on hunter-gatherer sharing methods or, verbal agreements when you have thousands of people in one place. You need a system. The source material describes these small clay pieces, spheres, cones, discs, that were used to track specific goods. A cone might represent a small measure of grain. A sphere might represent a larger measure. This wasn't just counting. This was the invention of data.
I don't dispute that it was a system, and a sophisticated one at that. But we have to look at the context of where this system appears and why.
But stick with the mechanism for just a moment, because this is the cognitive leap. For the first time, a human being could hold a clay cone in their hand and understand that it represented a measure of barley sitting in a granary a mile away. That abstraction, separating the item from the idea of the item, that's the root of all science and mathematics. It allowed these early societies to move away from subsistence living. It allowed them to project into the future.
It allowed them to project ownership. That is the key distinction, I think. You're framing this as a purely intellectual exercise, a eureka moment of abstraction. I'm saying the abstraction was secondary to the desire to define property.
The material describes these clay envelopes, hollow balls of clay, often called bullae, where these tokens were sealed inside. This is a crucial technical detail. You'd put the tokens inside the wet clay ball, seal it shut, and then bake it or let it dry. This proves the intent was accuracy and dispute resolution. It was about making sure that if you deposited 10 units, you got credit for 10 units. If there was a dispute, you broke the clay envelope to reveal the tokens inside. That is not oppression. That is the birth of fairness.
Fairness is a strong word for what I see as the birth of the audit. Let's talk about those bullae for a second. You seal tokens inside a clay ball to ensure no one tampers with the count. Why? You only need that level of rigorous security when you are defining strict ownership, specifically when you are excluding others from that ownership. The source explicitly talks about authentication and personal seals for security. This implies a society that has moved from communal trust to structural paranoia.
Or it implies a society that has moved from small bands to complex cities. You need security to prevent theft, which protects the community's food supply. If the granary is looted, everyone starves. The bulla is a technology of trust. It allows two people who might not know each other perfectly to engage in a transaction because the clay holds the truth. It effectively outsources trust to the object.
Or it protects the accumulation of wealth by a specific class. And this is why the site of Tepe Gawra is so critical to our discussion. And I feel like the functionalist view sometimes glosses over this. The archaeologists there found layers of settlements, a vertical timeline of how these towns grew over millennia. And what did they find in the graves? They found these accounting tokens buried alongside luxury items, gold, lapis lazuli, fine stones.
Which suggests these administrators were valued members of society. They were honored.
It suggests they were a separate class. If these tokens were merely administrative tools for the common good, like a public library card or a wrench, why are they buried with the dead as status symbols? This is the smoking gun for me. It indicates that the people who controlled the counting were not just public servants. They were a new elite with inherited status. The cognitive revolution you speak of coincided perfectly with the solidification of inequality. The ability to count was the ability to control.
I think you're conflating the result with the intent. Of course, those who manage the lifeblood of the city, the grain, the livestock, are going to hold a position of respect. But look at the alternative. Without this system to track goods, urbanization is impossible. You cannot have a city of 5,000 people without a way to plan, store, and allocate resources efficiently. The source states clearly that these tools allowed specific planning systems. That planning is what keeps people from starving in a drought. If the cost of that survival is that the chief accountant gets buried with a nice necklace, that seems like a fair trade for the survival of the species.
But was it a trade the population willingly made, or was it imposed by those who held the tokens?
It was a trade imposed by reality. Starvation is a harsh master. If you don't ration and track, you die.
Okay, let's look at the specific reality of the chief accountant you just mentioned. The text mentions a very famous artifact, the tablet with the name Kushum.
Yes, possibly the earliest recorded name in human history. It appears on a tablet detailing barley transactions.
And who was Kushum? A poet? A prophet? A great lover? No, the text says clearly, written records began as tools for administration and accounting. Kushum was an administrator. He was a signer of receipts. The first individual in history to lift his head above the anonymity of prehistory is a bureaucrat.
And that is momentous. Think about the shift in responsibility that represents. Before this, transactions were likely based on verbal trust or immediate exchange. I give you this, you give me that. Once you carve Kushum into a tablet, you have accountability. You have a record that survives time. It marks the dawn of a society where individuals take public responsibility for their part in the economy. It is the beginning of professional ethics.
Professional ethics. I view Kushum as the archetype of the systemizer. It proves that writing didn't begin as an art form or a way to connect human souls. It began as a ledger. It represents the depersonalization of human interaction into data points. Kushum isn't a person in this context. He's a function, a processing unit. The tablet isn't about him, it's about the barley. He is just the mechanism that guarantees the property rights of whoever owns that barley.
You're stripping the humanity out of it to fit your narrative. Kushum was a person solving a problem. He was using a new technology to make sure that the inputs match the outputs.
He was a person enforcing a system. And this brings me to the broader point the source makes about the shift in power dynamics. We see a rise of administrators and accountants replacing warriors as the early elites. The text is explicit about this shift. The power moved from the spear to the stylus.
And surely, you must agree that is a positive evolution. We're moving from a society ruled by whoever can swing a club the hardest, the warriors, to a society ruled by those who have knowledge. The source highlights that this shift demonstrated the power of knowledge and record-keeping. A hierarchy based on intellectual capability and the ability to organize resources is vastly preferable to one based on brute force.
Is it? Or is economic leverage just as violent as physical force, only slower? The warrior hits you with a club, the accountant starves you with a tablet. When the source talks about these tools enabling cities to thrive, we have to ask, thrive for whom? The concepts of property and administration emerge simultaneously. You cannot have administration without someone deciding who gets what. The clay tokens were the mechanism by which communal resources were partitioned into mine and yours. The accountant became the gatekeeper.
But someone has to be the gatekeeper or the resources vanish. This is the tragedy of the commons. If you have a granary open to everyone with no record keeping, it's empty in a week. These tools, these concepts of property, as you call them, are what allowed for long-term planning. The source explicitly says these objects enabled civilizations to plan, store, and allocate resources fairly and efficiently.
Fairly is the word I struggle with. Efficiently, I grant you. The system is incredibly efficient at moving resources to the top.
Fairly in the sense that the system worked to sustain the population. It moved humanity away from subsistence. We stopped living hand to mouth because we could track what we had. That's a collective victory.
We stopped living hand to mouth, but we started living in a world of haves and have-nots. The graves at Tepe Gawra prove that. The luxury items buried with the token holders show that the surplus created by this efficiency wasn't distributed equally.
it was siphoned off. The surplus didn't go to the people who grew the grain, it went to the people who counted it.
I'm not arguing that ancient Mesopotamia was a utopia of equality. I'm arguing that it was a functional step forward from chaos. And I want to pivot back to the idea of the cognitive revolution because I think you're undervaluing how profound this shift was for the human mind, regardless of the social structure. The mental architecture required to use these tools it's mind-blowing.
In what sense?
Well, the source discusses the link between these tokens and abstract thought. When you use a cone to represent a small measure of grain and a sphere to represent a large measure, you're performing a complex mental operation. You are separating the symbol from the reality. This is the birth of abstract thought. You can't have architecture, engineering, or medicine without that ability to think in abstracts. The source mentions that this sparked a revolution where humans invented numbers. That's not just about hoarding wealth. That's about understanding the universe.
I agree, it changed how we think, but I'd argue it narrowed how we think. It forced us to view the world through the lens of quantification.
How is quantification a narrowing? It's an expansion of resolution. It allows us to see the world more clearly.
Because not everything that counts can be counted. But once you have the hammer of accounting, everything looks like a nail. This leads us to a fascinating connection in the material, the legacy of these tokens in our language. The source brings up the linguistic link between the Latin word calculus and these roots.
Yes, calculus literally means pebble or small stone. It refers to the counting stones used on an abacus or accounting board.
Exactly. It's a direct reference to these clay tokens we're discussing.
Which is beautiful, isn't it? Our highest forms of mathematics, the differential calculus we use to model planetary orbits or build skyscrapers, share a direct lineage with these little clay pebbles used to count sheep in Iraq 5,000 years ago. That shows how deep this practical need runs in our intellectual history. It suggests that our capacity for high-level reasoning is grounded in this very practical need to organize our world. We didn't learn math to gaze at the stars. We learned it to manage the harvest.
It's a strong lineage, I grant you, but don't forget the other legacy mentioned in the source, which I find even more telling. Board games.
A lighter topic, but relevant.
The text draws a link between accounting tokens, the origins of the abacus, and the earliest board games like Senet or the Royal Game of Ur. It suggests that even our entertainment became derivative of this obsession with counting and strategy. We gamified the accumulation of resources.
I see that as a celebration of the intellect. We took the tools of survival, counting, strategy, planning, and we turned them into play. It shows how fundamental these concepts became to the human experience. We practice order, even when we're relaxing. It's a sign of a species that enjoys solving problems.
Where it shows that we became so obsessed with the win state, with acquiring more than our neighbor, that we started doing it for fun. The gamification of life. I mean, is that a feature or a bug? If the roots of our civilization are in accounting, then it makes sense that we view life as a ledger. We're constantly counting money, likes, steps, years. It traces back to that first clay cone. We invented a system that counts value, and inevitably that system began valuing some people more than others. The game has winners and losers.
But look at the alternative. Without that ability to count and plan, we're at the mercy of chaos. You look at a board game or a calculus equation and see obsession, I see order. I see the human mind imposing structure on a chaotic world.
And I see the human mind building a cage and calling it safety. The source mentions the rise of personal seals for security. That's the paranoia of possession. When you have stuff, you have to worry about losing stuff. The hunter-gatherer doesn't worry about someone stealing his granary because he doesn't have one.
He also worries about starving to death every winter. This is the trade-off you keep ignoring. The administrative miracle, as I'd call it, is the only reason we have the luxury to sit here and debate this. The source says these humble clay objects enabled economies and civilizations to thrive. Thriving implies a surplus. It implies safety. It implies that fewer children die in infancy because there's food stored for the lean times.
It implies growth, certainly, but fairly and efficiently. That's the phrase the source uses, and that is where I stumble. Efficiently? Yes. Fairly? The archaeological record at Tepe Gawra says no. The graves say no. The
the people buried with nothing, while the token masters were buried with gold. They would argue that the allocation wasn't fair. The system worked for the system's architects.
We can't judge a 5,000-year-old civilization by modern standards of equity. For their time, a system that prevented mass starvation was fair, in the sense that it worked, it delivered the goods, and the fact that we moved from warriors who take by force to administrators who manage by record is a step toward a more civil society.
A more polite society, perhaps, but one where the violence is hidden behind a clay envelope. The warrior looks you in the eye when he takes your land. The administrator does it with a stylus from a palace you aren't allowed to enter.
Let's go back to the Kushem tablet for a second. You called it the archetype of the bureaucrat. But think about what it requires to maintain that system. It requires trust. If I give you my grain to store and you give me a clay token in return, we're engaging in a compact of trust. That token is a promise. Civilization is built on those promises.
Trust or coercion. If you control the granary and the tokens, I have no choice but to trust you. The system enforces compliance. If I don't participate in your system of tokens, I don't participate in the food supply. That isn't trust, that is leverage.
But it also enforces accountability. If the grain goes missing, the record shows it. The personal seals authenticated the transaction. It meant you couldn't just lie. Truth became a physical object. That's profound. It anchored truth in reality rather than hearsay.
It is profound, but it also defines truth as what is written down. If it's not in the clay, it didn't happen. It elevates the record keeper to the arbiter of reality, and history is written by the people holding the stylus.
Which is better than the arbiter being the guy with the biggest sword.
We keep coming back to that. You prefer the accountant to the warrior? I'm saying they're the same person, just wearing different clothes. The warrior controls your body, the accountant controls your livelihood.
I think that's a false equivalency. The skills required to manage a complex economy, literacy, numeracy, planning, are skills that build the mind. The skills required to dominate physically are destructive. The source calls this a cognitive revolution for a reason. It expanded what it means to be human. It gave us a past and a future.
It expanded our capabilities, yes. But did it expand our humanity? Or did it reduce us to numbers in a ledger? When I see those graves at Tepe Gawra, I see the moment we decided that some lives were worth more than others based on how many clay tokens they held.
All right, we're running close to our time, and I want to try and summarize where we stand. I look at these clay spheres, cones, and discs, and I see the seeds of everything we've achieved. The roots of literacy lie in these practical needs. We didn't learn to write poetry, we learned to write to survive. The ability to keep track of stuff is what lifted humanity out of the mud. And while social hierarchy certainly occurred, the intent of this system was efficiency and survival. It was a triumph of the human mind.
And I acknowledge the technological achievement. It's undeniable. But we have to remember the context of Tepe Gawra. The roots of our civilization don't just include the writing, they include the grave goods and the seals. We invented a system that counts value, and inevitably, that system began valuing some people more than others. The transition from community to property and authentication fundamentally changed how we relate to one another. We gained the city, but we may have lost a certain kind of equality.
I suppose that is the tension of progress. Every solution creates a new set of problems.
Exactly. And looking at a simple clay sphere offers a profound reflection on our modern society. Our most complex digital economies, our bitcoins, our databases, they all trace directly back to these ancient attempts to trust, track, and transact.
We're still just moving tokens around, hoping the count is right at the end of the day.
And hoping that the people counting them are honest.
A fair point. Thank you all for joining us on this dive into deep history.
It has been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep debating.
Okay, I want to start today with a question, a big one. And I want you to really sit with it for a moment. Imagine the single most powerful tool in human history. The one thing that truly separated us from, the rest of the animal kingdom. The thing that allowed us to build empires, to conquer the planet, to go to the moon. What pops into your head?
I can guess what most people are thinking. Probably fire.
Fire's a big one. Definitely a contender. You're probably thinking of the wheel, too. That's the classic answer.
Right, the wheel is always up there.
Or if you're thinking about power in a more violent sense, maybe the sword or gunpowder.
All good guesses. I mean, they're all clearly pivotal moments in our history. You can't argue with that.
But they are all wrong. Or at least they aren't the answer we are looking for today. Because today we are doing a deep dive into something much smaller, something much more unassuming.
Okay.
We are talking about a little dusty lump of clay.
It really doesn't sound very impressive when you put it that way.
It doesn't. But that's the hook. That's the mystery. We are going to convince you over the next hour or so that a handful of mud is responsible for the world as we know it.
It is a fascinating argument. And when we look at the source material for this deep dive, specifically the article, The Clay Roots of Civilization and Literacy, we're looking at a trajectory that goes from mud to mathematics.
Mud to math. I like that.
It's a journey from a dirty riverbank to the highest levels of abstract philosophy. It's kind of mind-blowing.
So let's set the scene. We aren't in a modern skyscraper. We aren't in a high-tech lab. Where are we?
We need to go back, way back. We were traveling back roughly 5,000 to 11,000 years ago. We are dropping into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia, so the land between the rivers.
Exactly, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which is essentially modern-day Iraq.
Paint the picture for me. Because when I think ancient history, I usually think of, marble statues and guys in togas, but that's way later. What does this world feel like?
It feels gritty. It feels busy. It's dusty. It's hot. Extremely hot. But more importantly, it's loud. You have to imagine that for the first time in human history, people are crowding together.
Right.
These aren't just small, isolated tribes wandering the plains anymore. These are the seeds of the first true urban centers. Cities like Uruk.
So we have density.
Exactly. You have agriculture, which means you have food surpluses for the first time. You have trade, which means you have goods moving back and forth. You have animals, sheep, goats, cattle everywhere. And you have people. Lots and lots of people.
And when you have lots of people and lots of stuff,
You have a massive problem. You have chaos. Just utter chaos.
this is the central mystery we are unpacking today, the mission of this deep dive, if you will. We usually think civilization happened because of great charismatic leaders or massive wars that consolidated power, or maybe organized religion holding everyone together with a shared myth.
And those things play a role, certainly. They're not irrelevant. But the archaeological evidence points to something else as the root cause, something much more pragmatic.
It points to accounting.
I know. I can just hear the listeners checking their playback speed right now. Did he say accounting?
It sounds incredibly dry. I mean, no offense to any accountants listening. We love you. You keep us out of jail.
Yeah.
But we don't usually associate bookkeeping with saving humanity or inventing the human mind. But you're telling me that this is actually a thrilling story.
I promise you it is. This isn't just about counting beans or balancing a ledger. It is a story about a cognitive revolution.
A cognitive revolution.
Yes, it's about how the human brain actually changed structure, or at least changed how it processed the reality of the world, all because of these little clay objects.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So the premise is, how did simple clay tokens evolve into writing, create the concept of abstract numbers, birth the first bureaucracy, and this is the part that really surprised me, even lead to the board games we play on Friday nights?
It's all connected. It's an incredible domino effect. One small innovation, just trying to keep track of your stuff, leads to writing, which leads to math, which leads to the complex society we live in today.
So let's unpack this. Let's start at the beginning. We're in Mesopotamia. People are trading. I have sheep. You have grain. What's the issue? Why can't we just remember who owes what? Humans have pretty good memories.
We do, but our memories are evolved for a specific context. When you live in a small tribe of, say, 30 or 50 people, you know everyone.
Right.
You know their face, their name, their parents, their reputation. You know that I gave you a basket of grain yesterday, and you know you owe me a favor. Social pressure and, biological memory are enough to keep things fair.
Right. If I stiff you on the deal, everyone in the tribe knows I'm a jerk. I lose status.
Yeah.
The whole system corrects itself.
Exactly. It's a reputation economy. But now, fast forward to these early cities, you aren't dealing with your cousin.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a stranger from the other side of the settlement. Or maybe a trader from a completely different region who you'll never see again.
Okay.
You're dealing with hundreds, maybe thousands of transactions. Human memory just isn't built for that kind of database management. My memory isn't built for remembering what I had for breakfast, let alone 1,000 grain transactions with people I barely know.
Precisely. And there's another factor, time. In a tribe, transactions are usually immediate or short-term. But with agriculture, you have seasons. I might give you seed grain now in the spring.
And you won't pay me back until the harvest.
And you pay me back in 6 months when the harvest comes in.
That's a long time to remember a specific number. And details.
It is. And memories fade. Or, more cynically, memories warp in our favor. Oh, I'm sure you only gave me 10 bushels when actually it was 20. It's just human nature.
So we have a trust gap, a massive one.
A massive trust gap. So we need a system. We need an external hard drive for the human brain. We need a way to store data outside of our own heads. And that brings us to the first big innovation, the token.
The token. Okay, so let's visualize these. I'm looking at the pictures from the source material, and honestly, if I saw these on the ground, I'd probably kick them aside. They look like gravel. They are very humble objects, very unassuming. But we need to look closer because the genius is in the details.
Describe them for the listener who can't see them. What are we holding in our hands, hypothetically?
Imagine small pieces of clay. They're hand-molded. They are hardened, maybe sun-dried or baked in a low-fire oven. They are small enough to fit the palm of your hand, maybe 1 or 2 centimeters across.
Teeny tiny.
But here's the key. They aren't just random blobs of mud. They come in specific standardized shapes.
Okay, so I see spheres. Just little balls of clay.
Right. Spheres are very common.
I see cones. Like little Hershey Kisses made of dirt.
Cones, discs like little coins, cylinders, tetrahedrons, little pyramids, all sorts of geometric shapes.
And some of them have markings on them.
Oh,
like
no.
little scratches.
Yes, that's where it gets really interesting. Some are just plain shapes, but others have incisions. A sphere might be cut in half. A disc might have a cross carved into it. A cone might have a series of parallel lines scratching the surface.
So it's a vocabulary, it's a code.
Exactly. It is a system of symbols. It's not just this rock reminds me of a sheep. It's this specific shape with this specific marking means exactly 1 jar of oil. It's precise.
And these weren't toys. They look like game pieces from some ancient board game.
That's a very common misconception. When early archaeologists first found these, they were baffled. They listed them in their catalogs as amulets or game pieces or just miscellaneous objects.
Yeah, you had no idea.
No idea. It took a long, long time to realize that this was actually a trans-regional accounting system.
That's wild. So for centuries, we were digging up the receipts of the ancient world and thinking they were toys.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But their purpose was deadly serious. These were tools for survival, for building an economy.
Okay, so let's play this out. How did they work in practice? Let's say I'm a farmer in the city of Brooke 5,000 years ago.
Okay, you're a farmer. You have a flock of sheep, but you can't graze them in the city. You need to entrust them to a shepherd to take them out to the pasture lands for the season.
Okay, so I'm handing over my entire livelihood, my capital, to this guy.
Right. And you won't see him for 6 months. How do you make sure he comes back with the same number of sheep?
I guess I'd count them.
You count them when he leaves. He leaves with 50 sheep. 6 months later, he comes back. He has 40 sheep. He says, oh, well, Wolf's got the others. Or maybe he says, no, you only gave me 40 to begin with.
Ah, I see. It's my word against his. And if he's a smooth talker, I might get ripped off.
Exactly. Or maybe you are the dishonest one. Maybe he comes back with 50 and you say, I gave you 60. Where are my other 10 sheep?
Right. It cuts both ways, the trust gap.
So you use tokens. Before he leaves, you and the shepherd sit down together. For every single sheep he takes, you take 1 small clay sphere. If he takes 50 sheep, you make a pile of 50 spheres.
1 sphere, 1 sheep. A 1-to-1 correspondence.
Exactly. This is the seed of data. It's the first time we are taking a physical object from the real world, a living, breathing, woolly sheep, and representing it with an abstract symbol. The clay sphere is the sheep in the context of our agreement.
That seems simple to us now, but I guess it's revolutionary because it's objective. The clay doesn't lie. The clay doesn't forget. The clay doesn't try to gaslight you.
Precisely. You take those 50 spheres, you put them in a jar, maybe you wrap a cloth over it and seal it with more clay. You keep it in your house or maybe in a temple for safekeeping. When he returns, you open the jar. You match the spheres to the sheep, 1-to-1.
It's an audit.
It is the first audit in history. If there are spheres left over, he owes you sheep. Simple as that.
But you mentioned it wasn't just sheep. It was a whole system.
Right, because civilization isn't just sheep. You're trading barley, you're trading oil, you're trading textiles, you're trading labor days of work owed. So they needed different shapes for different commodities.
So a cone might be right, a basket of grain.
That's the theory. A small cone might be a small measure of grain. A large cone might be a larger measure. A cylinder might be an animal. A disc incised with a cross might represent a flock.
And here is the mind-blowing part that you mentioned earlier. We find these same shapes with the same meanings all over the Near East, from Iran to Syria to Turkey.
Yes. It's astonishing.
Wait, really? So if I walk 1,000 miles from Uruk to Susa, a cone still means a measure of grain?
Yes. It suggests that this wasn't just one guy in a basement inventing this. This was a standardized trans-regional system of administration. It implies a level of economic coordination that rivals, the euro or the dollar.
That is incredible. It's like a prehistoric currency, but specific to goods. It's a language of commerce.
In a way, yes, but it's primarily about accountability. It's a receipt. It's proof.
Okay, speaking of receipts, let's talk about the next evolution, because having a jar of loose tokens seems risky.
It is risky. How so?
Well, I mean, if I have the jar in my house, what's to stop me from sneaking in a few extra spheres while you're gone, to make it look like you owe me more, or digging some out to cover for my own miscalculation?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that brings us to the envelope, because this is where the story takes a turn that honestly feels like a spy novel to me.
The envelopes, yes. When I read envelope, I'm thinking of a paper rectangle I put a letter in. But that's not what this is.
No, paper doesn't exist yet. Papyrus is a long way off. We are working with clay. So imagine you have your 50 spheres representing your 50 sheep. You don't want anyone tampering with them.
Right. I need a lock. A security system.
So you make a clay lock. The archaeologists call them boule, but envelope is a great description. You take a lump of wet clay and you flatten it out like a pancake. You put your tokens, your spheres and cones, into the middle of the pancake.
Okay, I've got the tokens in the middle.
Then you fold the clay up around them and seal it shut. You smooth it out until you have a hollow clay ball with the tokens rattling around inside.
It's a time capsule. It's like a clay Kinder egg.
It is. And once that clay dries and hardens, there is no way to get the tokens out without breaking the ball.
I see. So if the shepherd comes back 6 months later and the ball is still intact, we know the count hasn't been tampered with. It's a secure transaction.
Exactly. It creates a chain of custody. It's a physical contract.
But I'm going to push back here. It seems overly complicated. Why the clay ball? Why not just put the tokens in a leather pouch and tie it with a specific knot? Or put them in a wooden box and seal it with wax?
You could, and they probably did use perishables like leather or cloth that haven't survived. But clay offers something that leather doesn't.
Which is?
Brittleness. It's early tamper evidence technology. Think of it like the plastic ring on a milk jug, or the safety seal on a bottle of aspirin.
Ah, right. If you cut a leather pouch, you can sew it back up. If you untie a knot, you can retie it. It's hard to prove.
Exactly. But if you crack a dried clay ball, you can't put it back together seamlessly. It's a one-way street. Once that envelope is sealed, the record is permanent until both parties agree to break it open.
That is ingenious.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly secure, sealed contract.
It really is. It solved the problem of trust between strangers.
But there's a flaw. A massive, glaring flaw in this system. And as soon as I read about it, I thought, how did they not see this coming?
What's the flaw?
If I'm the administrator or the merchant, and I have 50 of these clay balls on my shelf, how do I know what's inside them?
That is the $1,000,000 question, or the $1,000,000 question.
Right. I mean, I have a ball, it rattles. But is it sheep? Is it grain? Is it a debt owed to me or by me? Is it for Dave or is it for Steve? I have to break it to find out.
And once you break it, the contract is void.
It seems like a nightmare.
Right.
You have created a black box of data. You've secured the information so well that you've also made it inaccessible to yourself.
You've locked your file cabinet and thrown away the key until the deal is done.
That seems incredibly annoying for an accountant. Imagine trying to do an inventory of your assets. Well, I have 50 clay balls, so I have something. It's useless for planning.
It was incredibly annoying, and that annoyance, that practical friction, is what drove the next massive leap in human evolution.
This is section 2 of our deep dive, the birth of writing. And it's so cool because it didn't happen because someone wanted to write a poem.
No.
It happened because some bureaucrat was annoyed they couldn't see what was inside the clay ball.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, Laziness, or let's call it efficiency, was the father.
So imagine the scene.
Mm.
You're an administrator in Uruk. You're making these envelopes all day. You're pressing the tokens into the wet clay pancake, ready to fold it up.
You're holding the wet clay in one hand, you have the tokens in the other, and you have a moment of inspiration. You think, before I seal this up and hide these tokens forever, maybe I should make a note on the outside so I remember what's on the inside.
So what do? Do I invent a new alphabet from scratch?
No, that's too much work. That's a huge leap. You use what you have, you take the token itself, say the sphere for a sheep, and you press it into the surface of the wet clay envelope. It leaves a circular indentation.
A footprint, a little stamp.
Exactly, a perfect little circle. If there are 5 spheres inside, you make 5 circular impressions on the outside. If there are 3 cones inside, you press the cone into the outside 3 times.
So now the outside of the ball has a picture of what's inside. It's a table of contents.
Exactly, it's a label.
That seems like a small step, but it's actually a huge logic leap, a huge conceptual jump.
It's a massive leap because suddenly you have a 2-dimensional symbol on the outside that carries the same information as the 3-dimensional physical object on the inside. You have created a sign, you've decoupled the information from the object.
And then the aha moment. The moment that changed the world.
Well, someone, we don't know who, some brilliant, overworked administrator in Uruk, looked at that clay ball and thought, wait a minute.
If the marks on the outside tell me everything I need to know,
Why am I bothering to put the tokens inside at all?
mind blown.
Right, why make a hollow ball? Why create this complex 3D shape? Why not just take a flat slab of clay, a tablet, and press the tokens into it to make the marks?
And just like that, the envelope becomes the tablet.
And the tokens, the physical objects that we've been using for thousands of years, become obsolete. They are replaced by their 2-dimensional impressions.
This is the technical dawn of writing.
It is, and it's important to clarify here. Writing didn't start as representing speech. It didn't start as I love you or the king is great. It started as a picture of a cone and a picture of a sphere. It was purely distinct marks on a surface, replacing physical objects to convey information.
I just love that the first writing wasn't poetry, it was a spreadsheet.
It was absolutely a spreadsheet. It was data entry. The first literature was a ledger.
And this brings us to the first celebrity of history, or at least the first name we can attach to a specific human being.
Yes, the legend of Kushim.
I feel like we should know this name. We all know Gilgamesh, we know Sargon of Akkad, but tell us about Kushim.
So we have a clay tablet. It's about 5,000 years old, found in the city of Uruk, and it has some markings on it. It lists amounts of barley. It's a receipt for a grain transaction. And at the bottom, there are 2 symbols, Ku and Shim.
Kushim.
Most historians and linguists agree this is a name. The tablet reads essentially 29,086 measures barley, 37 months Kushim.
So Kushim signed this. This is his or her work.
Yes. This seems to be the signature of the person responsible for this transaction.
And who was Kushim?
Yeah.
Was he a great conqueror, a powerful priest, a poet who wrote epics?
Almost certainly not. Kushim was an accountant or administrator, a bureaucrat. He or she, frankly, we have no idea, was the person responsible for checking the barley inventory.
That is hilarious. The first person in all of human history whose name we know wasn't a hero. It was the guy in the back office making sure the numbers added up.
29,086 measures of barley. Think about that number. That's a lot of barley.
It is. It's a huge quantity.
And that's the point. The scale of the economy had gotten so big that you needed a Kushim. And Kushim needed a tablet. He couldn't keep that in his head. No one could.
It really emphasizes what you said earlier about human priorities. We like to think we are defined by our art and our stories and our myths. But when push comes to shove, we are defined by our stuff, our property.
Writing was invented to protect property. That's the hard truth from the archaeological record. It wasn't for expression, it was for control.
That's a heavy thought. Writing was for control.
Well, think about it. If you can write and the farmer who grew the grain can't, you have power over him. You control the record. You control the debt. You define his reality.
I want to dig into that power dynamic, but first I want to ground this in the archaeology. Because it's easy to talk about tablets and tokens in the abstract, but we actually found these things in the ground. And this brings us to section 3, the story of Tepe Gawra.
Tepe Gawra, yes. It's a fascinating archaeological site in northern Iraq, near modern-day Mosul.
Why is this specific pile of dirt so important to our story?
Because of the layer cake effect.
Explain that.
Archaeologists call it stratigraphy. When people live in one spot for thousands of years, they build on top of the ruins of the previous generation. Mud brick houses melt in the rain, they collapse, and people just smooth it over and build on top. So as you dig down, you are literally traveling back in time.
Like counting the rings on a tree. Each layer is a different era.
Exactly. And Tepe Gawra has layer upon layer of settlements spanning the exact period where these tokens were being used and evolving. It allows us to see the evolution happening in sort of slow motion.
So we can see the moment the tokens appear in the record.
We can see them become more complex, but what's really telling is what they found in the graves.
The graves.
Yes. How people are buried tells you a huge amount about how they lived. In the very early deep layers of Tepe Gawra, the graves are pretty simple. Everyone is buried more or less the same way.
Egalitarian?
Pretty much, maybe a few beads, a pot. Everyone is roughly equal in death. But as you get to the layers where the tokens become common, specifically around level XI and X in the dig site, the graves change dramatically. You start seeing some graves, just a few packed with luxury items.
What kind of luxury are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking gold rosettes, lapis lazuli beads imported all the way from Afghanistan, beautifully carved obsidian and stone vessels, real conspicuous wealth. And tokens.
Tokens in the graves.
Yes, archaeologists found tokens placed specifically with these wealthy individuals.
Why? Were they taking their account books with them to the afterlife?
Hey, God, just so you know, you owe me 3 sheep.
Perhaps. Or maybe the tokens themselves had become symbols of power and authority. Being a keeper of the tokens might have been a prestigious title, a mark of status. But the most striking thing is the children.
What about the children?
They found graves of children toddlers, infants buried with significant wealth, gold, lapis, and stone.
Okay, let's unpack the implication of that. If a 5-year-old is buried with a pile of gold, they didn't earn it. They weren't a great hunter. They weren't a wise leader. They didn't negotiate a brilliant trade deal.
They were born into it.
Inherited wealth, inherited status.
So this is the moment social classes solidify in the archaeological record.
Exactly. And the argument is that this accounting system, the ability to accumulate, track, and store surplus wealth, is what made that possible. Before tokens, if you were a great hunter, you had status. But you couldn't really store 1,000 dead buffalo. They'd rot.
Right. Wealth was perishable. It was immediate.
But you can store the rights to a future grain harvest. You can store the claim on someone's labor recorded on a piece of clay. And you can pass those claims down to your kids.
So the humble clay token is the grandfather of the trust fund baby.
In a manner of speaking, yes. It marks the shift from status based on action and ability to status based on possession and lineage. A fundamental shift in what it means to be human.
Wow. Okay, so we have class structure, we have writing. But the source material talks about something even deeper, a cognitive revolution. This is section 4. And honestly, this is the part that made my brain hurt a little.
This is my favorite part. This is where we get into the sort of brain science of it all.
You mentioned earlier that tokens created numbers. But surely people could count before tokens. I mean, I have 10 fingers. Cavemen could count to 10, right?
They could count, yes. But they didn't have abstract numbers.
Explain the difference. What is a concrete number versus an abstract number? This feels important.
Okay, let's try a thought experiment. If I show you 3 sheep and then I show you 3 trees, your brain immediately recognizes the shared quality of 3.
Right. It's the same number. 3 is 3. It's a concept.
To you, it is. But to a pre-literate Sumerian mind, those might be completely different concepts. 3 sheep is a flock texture. 3 trees is a grove texture. The number is bound to the object it's describing.
Okay. I think I'm getting it. It's like how we use different words for groups of animals. We say pair of shoes, but a brace of pheasants. Or a pride of lions versus a flock of geese. The noun changes based on the object.
Exactly. But imagine if that applied to the number itself. Imagine having a different word or concept for 1, depending on whether you were counting daughters or days or ducks.
That sounds exhausting and incredibly limiting.
It limits you. You can't do complex math if numbers are tied to objects. You can't multiply 3 sheep by 10 days. It makes no sense conceptually. The units don't match.
So how did the tokens fix this? How do they break the number away from the object?
The token system physically separated the quantity from the commodity.
How?
Remember, you have a specific shape for the commodity, like a cone for grain, and you have a certain number of those cones. Eventually, with the tablets, they simplified. They started using a single sign for grain and then a separate sign for the quantity.
Oh, I see. So you're not drawing 3 cones anymore. You draw 1 symbol for cone and then 3 tick marks next to it.
Exactly. You've pulled the 3-ness out of the sheep, out of the grain. You have abstracted the concept of quantity itself. The token isn't a sheep anymore, it's a counter. It represents oneness.
And once you have oneness as a concept, as a thing you can hold in your hand,
You can add it to another oneness. You have invented arithmetic.
that seems like such a subtle shift, but it's actually mind-bending. It means you can apply the concept of three to anything. 3 sheep, 3 kings, 3 days, 3 ideas.
It liberates the human mind. And once you have abstract numbers, you can do something even more powerful than just counting. You can plan.
Planning.
Once you have abstract numbers and a way to record them, you can model the future.
Whoa. Hold on. Model the future. That sounds like science fiction.
Think about it. If I can write down, we have 10,000 bushels of grain in the storehouse, and I know we eat 500 bushels a month, I can do a simple division. I can calculate how long we will survive.
You can predict a famine.
You can predict a famine before it happens. You can decide to ration today to save lives tomorrow. You can calculate how many workers you can support for a public works project.
You can simulate scenarios.
Yes. Before this, you lived season to season. You reacted to the world. With data, you can live years in advance. You can plan to build a wall that takes 5 years to complete because you can budget the food and labor for the workers.
It's the birth of the project manager.
Yeah.
The birth of strategy.
It is. Civilization is essentially a giant project management exercise, and
Right.
you can't do it without the data. You can't build the pyramids or the ziggurats on a hunch. You need the spreadsheet.
There's another concept here in the notes about authentication. We touched on the seals, but let's go deeper on this because this feels very, very modern.
Yes, the cylinder seal. This is another amazing clay technology that developed right alongside the tokens and tablets.
Describe it for us. What is it?
Imagine a small cylinder, about the size of your thumb, made of stone, precious stone usually, like agate or lapis lazuli. It's carved with a very intricate little picture in reverse.
In reverse, like a stamp.
Exactly. It might be a scene of a god presenting a gift to a king, or animals fighting, or a complex geometric pattern, and it was unique to an individual.
Like a signet ring.
Similar idea, but instead of stamping it, you roll it. You'd roll this cylinder over the wet clay of your tablet or envelope. It leaves a long rectangular strip of imagery, like a little mural.
And this was your ID, your personal brand.
Yes, that picture was you. It was your signature. No two seals were exactly alike.
So if I see a tablet with that specific picture of a lion fighting a bull, I know, okay, Steve authorized this transaction.
Exactly. It's the beginning of identity verification. It's proof of authorship and authorization. Today, we use passwords or fingerprints or digital signatures. Back then, you used your personal carved stone cylinder.
It's funny how we are still dealing with the exact same problems. Who are you? How much do you have? Did you sign this?
The fundamental problems of civilization haven't changed in 5,000 years. Only the tools have. We've just changed clay for pixels.
Okay, speaking of tools, let's get to section 5. Unexpected legacies. Because this is where the story gets really fun. We are going from accounting to games.
Yes, board games.
I love board games. Are you telling me that Monopoly has its roots in Mesopotamian tax law?
In a way, yes. I mean, that might be stretching it a bit, but the core mechanics are there.
Explain.
Well, think about the mechanics of the earliest board games we know of. Games like Senet in Egypt, or the Royal Game of in Mesopotamia, which dates back to roughly the same period.
The Royal Game of I've seen pictures of that. It's a beautiful board with squares and you move pieces around.
Right, you have a grid, you have pieces tokens, really. You are moving them according to rules. You are tracking progress from a start point to an end point.
It does sound a bit like an abacus, or moving tokens around on a counting board.
It is very similar. The source material suggests a strong link between the counting boards, the physical spaces used to arrange tokens for calculation, and the game boards. The same cognitive skills are at play.
So you can just picture some bored accountant sitting there with his tokens and his grid and thinking, hey, I bet I can get my token to the other side faster than you.
That is a very likely scenario. Strategy games are essentially accounting for fun. You are managing resources, positioning assets, calculating odds, and trying to reach a goal.
That is hilarious. So every time I play War or Risk or Catan, I'm just engaging in gamified bureaucracy.
Essentially. And there's a linguistic clue that ties this all together in a really neat bow.
Oh, I love etymology. Lay it on me.
The word calculus.
High-level math, integrals, derivatives, nightmares for high school students everywhere.
Right. Do you know what the word calculus means in Latin?
I have no idea.
It means pebble.
No way. You're kidding.
Not at all. A calculus is a small stone used for counting. used on a counting board, an abacus.
So when we say we are calculating something,
You are literally saying you are pebbling it. You are mentally moving stones around.
that is amazing. It draws a direct, unbroken line from the most advanced mathematics we have back to those little clay spheres in the dirt.
It shows that the core concept hasn't changed. Whether you are using a supercomputer or a pile of rocks, you are manipulating discrete bits of information to understand the world.
We are just moving digital pebbles.
Precisely. And this also links directly to the abacus. The abacus is just a formalized, more efficient way of moving tokens on a rod instead of a board. It's all part of the same lineage.
I'll never look at a board game or a math textbook the same way again. It's all just clay tokens in disguise.
It is. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Okay, we're moving into the final stretch here. Section 6, the rise of the administrator. We've talked about the objects, the tokens, and tablets, but let's talk about the people again. You mentioned Kushim. But let's look at the broader social shift.
The social transformation that this technology enabled?
Right. We established that in the old world, the pre-token world, the warriors were the elite, the guy with the biggest muscles who could throw a spear the furthest.
Right. In a hunter-gatherer society or early tribal warfare, physical prowess is power. If you can protect the tribe and bring home the food, you lead the tribe. It's very direct.
But the token system changed that. It created a new path to power.
It introduced a new kind of power, knowledge, information.
The power of the nerd.
The revenge of the nerds, 3000 BC. But seriously, think about the leverage. If you are the one who knows how to read and write on the tablets, you control the information. You control the collective memory.
I want to go back to Kushim. We laughed about him being a boring accountant, but let's look at his actual power. If Kushim is the only guy who can read that tablet,
He holds the keys to the kingdom.
literally, if the king wants to know if he can afford to build a new temple or go to war, he has to ask Kushim.
And if Kushim says, "Sorry, Your Highness, the barley harvest was down 20% according to these tablets," the king has to listen. He can't just wish it to be different. The reality of the state is defined by the record.
So the scribe becomes the gatekeeper of reality, the source of truth.
Exactly. And that's a very powerful and potentially very dangerous position to be in.
It is. If I'm a corrupt scribe, I can cook the books. I can erase a debt that I owe. I can invent a debt that someone owes me. I can ruin a rival family just by changing a few wedge marks on a piece of clay.
Which is why scribes became a protected elite class. They weren't just writing letters, they were the audit committee of the state. They were highly trained, highly respected, and likely very well paid.
It created a class of professionals, the bureaucracy. And we often complain about bureaucracy today, red tape, forms, waiting in line at the DMV. But the source material makes a strong argument that without this bureaucracy, civilization literally cannot function.
Explain that. Why can't we just have a city without the paperwork? Seems nice.
Well, think about scale again. You can't feed 50,000 people in a city like Uruk based on a handshake and good intentions. You need a system to get grain from thousands of farms to the central warehouse to the bakery to the people. That requires tracking. It requires logistics.
And logistics requires tokens. Or tablets.
It requires data. The clay tokens allowed for the efficient allocation of resources.
That sounds like an economist speaking.
It is, but it's true. It also allowed for fairness, or at least the appearance of fairness. If I can show you the tablet that proves you didn't pay your taxes, I can enforce the law without just hitting you with a club.
So, in a way, accounting reduced violence.
Ideally, yes. It moved conflict from the battlefield to the courtroom or the temple steps. It replaced might makes right with the record makes right.
That is a profound shift in human behavior. It's the basis of law.
It's the cornerstone of civil society. We trust the record. We trust the deed to our house. We trust the number in our bank statement. If that trust breaks down, if the clay crumbles, society collapses into chaos.
It's terrifying how fragile it is, really. It all depends on us agreeing that these marks on clay or paper or screens actually mean something real.
It is a shared hallucination supported by accounting.
A shared hallucination supported by accounting. That is going on a t-shirt. I want one.
I'd buy it. But it leads to the final question. The big, so what?
Let's summarize where we've been.
We started with a lump of clay. We saw it shaped into tokens, cones, spheres, disks to solve a memory and trust problem.
We saw those tokens get sealed in clay envelopes for security, creating a tamper-proof contract.
We saw the tokens get impressed onto the outside of the envelope, creating the first written signs, the first symbols.
We saw the envelope flatten into the tablet, making the tokens obsolete and birthing writing as a system of data entry.
We saw how this created abstract numbers, which allowed for mathematics, planning, and complex architecture.
And we saw how it created social classes, inherited wealth, and the rise of a new power structure based on knowledge, the administrator.
It is a sweeping journey, and it really challenges the idea that culture is just about art and music and philosophy.
Culture is built on a scaffold of administration. You can't have the poet without the accountant to make sure the poet gets fed.
That's the big takeaway for me. We tend to look down on the boring stuff, the forms, the receipts, the data entry. But that boring stuff is the engine of human progress. The roots of civilization are not gold or marble. They are clay. They are the humble tools of organization.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
So here's my final provocative thought for you, listener, and for you.
Go for it. I'm ready.
If writing and numbers, the very things we use to measure intelligence, the things we test our kids on, the foundation of science and literature, if they were invented just to track property, just to count sheep and grain, how much of our modern intelligence is actually just a byproduct of bureaucracy?
That is a deep question. What do you mean?
I mean, are we these spiritual, artistic beings who just happen to count? Or are we, at our core, just sophisticated counting machines that learn to tell stories to pass the time between audits?
Evolutionarily speaking, the counting gave us the survival advantage. The stories might just be the beautiful decoration on the ledger.
Oof, decoration on the ledger. That hits hard. It's a bit bleak.
It does, but maybe the beauty is in the subversion of it. Maybe the amazing part is that we took something so functional, a tool for greed, essentially, for hoarding resources and controlling others, and we turned it into something that could write poetry and philosophy and love letters and podcast scripts.
That's a more optimistic way to look at it. We hacked the accounting system to create art. We stood on the shoulders of Kushim to reach for the stars.
Exactly. He gave us the tool, and we decided what to build with it.
Well, listener, I hope you never look at a receipt the same way again. Next time the cashier hands you that slip of paper or you get that email confirmation for an online order, just take a second to respect the 5,000 years of history behind it.
And remember Kushim.
And remember Kushim, the patron saint of the deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.